You are listening to the Horse Radio Network, part of the Equine Network family.
Realize that it is attainable. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the messages or the gift I've been able to give the amateur community in our discipline. I'm just couldn't be happier because, and I've told so many people, if you want it badly enough, it is absolutely possible. You absolutely can ride at Kentucky. You're going to have to give some things up.
Yeah.
And it is possible. And even if you think you have enough money, you can still make it happen. You have to know how to make the lifestyle of riding at a high level work for your lifestyle with your day job. And I think that a lot of people have looked at this and realized that this is possible for them too. And so I'm hoping that is the case. And I'm positive. I've told so many people, I've just given them a pat on the back and said, I am positive that if you want this, that you can make it happen for you. And if you get a chance to ride at a 5-star, if you get a chance to ride at Kentucky, it will be a week that you will relive over and over and over again, just with incredible, feeling of it. I think the feeling of accomplishment is the most incredible thing that I took away from that.
Welcome to the Practical Horseman podcast, featuring conversations with respected riders, industry leaders, and horse care experts. The show is co-hosted by Practical Horseman editors, and our goal is to inform, educate, and inspire. I'm Julia Murphy, and this week's episode is with veterinarian and top-level eventer Kevin Keane. Keane has successfully combined work and play. As a vet and avid equestrian, Keane has the best of both worlds. In his career, he cares for horses at his practice, sports medicine associates, and in his personal life, he's a competitive eventer and horse lover. He is the all-around horse person, surrounded by the thing he loves most at all times. Keane grew up on a farm in Illinois where he quickly became the one who loved to take care of the horses and other animals. That passion continued through his youth and high school years, and he worked hard through college to make it to vet school. After his undergraduate, Keane was accepted to and attended vet school at the University of Illinois. Throughout those years while he was in school, he filled his summers and holidays with riding as much as he could and educating himself on the sport. Years later, international eventer Philip Dutton moved to the United States, and Keane became his vet and very good friend. Dutton suggested that Keane pick up eventing because he thought the sport would be manageable with his busy life as a vet, and the rest was history. Not only is Keane a successful and tenured vet, he has also competed up to the 5-star level and has conquered top-level events such as the Kentucky 3-Day. During our conversation, Keane goes into depth about his history as both a vet and a rider, and discusses how he manages to balance his career and his life as an equestrian. He also offers great tips for amateurs who are juggling the same work-life balance that he's experienced. Before we dive into the podcast with Keane, I'd like to thank the sponsor of this week's episode, Practical Horseman On Demand, and share their message. At Practical Horseman On Demand, you can enjoy hundreds of how-to videos and get insider access to exclusive interviews and lectures, slow-motion demonstrations, and step-by-step tutorials taught by top-level pros in the hunter, jumper, equitation, and eventing disciplines. New content is always rolling out, so there's always fresh new videos available on the topics important to you. Join now at practicalhorsemanondemand.com and start streaming from any smart device. Now enjoy the episode with Keane. This is a really, really fun experience to be talking to you because not only are you a rider, but you're also a vet in the industry. So we kind of get the best of both worlds with you, get to hear about the riding and about your profession. So can only guess that the thing that brought those two together is obviously horses and your love for them. So first question is, how did you get interested in horses at the beginning?
Okay, so I was one of those very fortunate children in that I had extremely generous parents that pretty much let us have all the animals that we wanted. We lived on, I call it a gentleman's farm, Julia. It was, my father did not make his living as a farmer, but we had a lot of farm animals, mostly horses. And I have quite a lot of siblings. I have 7 sisters, and I have 2 brothers. And my father made sure that all of us had a horse. So we had a lot of horses, and they changed the numbers of them, and the names of them changed, every couple of years, because he was always, acquiring more of them. And as I went on, and I was in 4-H, which I enjoyed tremendously, having farm animals. I lived in the Midwest. I lived in northern Illinois on the Wisconsin border. And so I grew up in farm country. And as I got a little bit older, by that I mean kind of early teenager, I became the person in the family that more or less specialized in wanting to take care of the horses. I had always been crazy about animals, and like I say, my parents, they were saints, basically. I had every kind of animal you could imagine. I had, a number of horses. I had, pigs and sheep, and I had beef cattle, and I had, chickens and guinea pigs, and, white mice and hamsters. I just had everything. And they let me have all that, which was pretty great way to grow up. And then as I was in school and, knowing I needed to make a career choice of some sort, and we had a wonderful vet when I was a child who'd come out and he'd do the castrations on the young colts and this type of thing. And he's just a wonderful man. His name was Hank Schlachta. And I would always, I'd wait around all day for him to come. We didn't have cell phones. That was about 50 years before cell phones. And essentially, the vet would tell you when you called their office that they would either come morning or afternoon. So you just would wait for them. And I was just always excited to wait for Dr. Schlachta to come, and I'd work with him. And he was an influence on me, as was another vet I worked for later, Gordon Iverson. And I was always wanting to take care of animals. If I find a bird with a fractured wing or something, I would nurse it back to health and so forth. So I kind of had that upbringing and background. And my father just loved horses, and so he was always acquiring new ones. And I became the person in the family that would take care of them, which was before I went to school, catching a school bus, and then when I came home. And my siblings helped me, but then as they got older, my sisters developed more interest in being cheerleaders and this type of thing at school. And so I kind of took on my shoulders the responsibility of caring for all the animals. And then it just grew from there. So that's how I was introduced to horses. And then joining a veterinary medicine was what I always wanted to do. And I was fortunate enough that it worked out for me, the schooling.
And when did you decide, in your studies, that you wanted to be a vet?
Well, I had wanted to when I was in high school. I wanted to from when I was very young. And then as I was in high school and then getting close to having to make a decision to go to college, and that was in the early 70s. And so that was a time when it was extremely competitive to get into veterinary school, medical school, and any of the professional colleges. And so I knew that you had to be a very good student. And I really buckled down in my last couple of years of high school and applied myself. And then once I did, scholastics became very easy. And I was fortunate in that I was one of those people that I was what I'd call a good test taker. Right. I think sometimes that one of my colleagues in the class maybe knew some of the information a little bit better, but I was very good at taking exams. And so I tended to score well. And I had I was able to be an A student quite proficiently. Mm-hmm. And so basically I went to school as an undergraduate, and I, was a straight A student. Mm-hmm. And so when I applied to vet school, which I did when I was a junior in college. So I had gone to college about 2.5 years, and I applied to vet school, and it was just one of the best moments of my life to get that phone call and find out that I had been accepted, because, there's hundreds and hundreds of applications for only about 80 spaces. Yeah. And so I was thrilled to get that call that I had been accepted. And then once I went to vet school, so I started vet school then in, kind of the mid 70s. I graduated in 79 and from the University of Illinois, because I was an Illinois resident. And mm-hmm. At the time I went to vet school, it was a requirement that you go to the vet school in the state in which you're a resident. That has changed now. You can pretty much go, like I could apply now to Cornell or UC Davis or, Florida, wherever. But back then you had to go to the vet school in the state in which you resided. And that, there were reasons for that. That the state basically subsidized a large part of your education because they wanted to keep veterinarians in their state because of the large number of farm animals in Iowa, Indiana, the Midwestern states, Illinois, and so forth. So it actually was not that expensive for me to go to vet school. That's changed tremendously. Some of these young doctors, I realize, have, enormous debt when they get out of school, but I was fortunate that that was not the case. And so I started vet school in about the mid 70s, and it actually, as long as you paid attention, went to class every day, and did your work, it actually is very straightforward. It was not, there were small challenges, but it was just a great experience.
Yeah. And were you riding all throughout your studies as well?
So I had a lot of horses that my father supplied me with prior to going to the vet school. And then what I would do while I was doing my academics was I would only ride during the summertime and then on holidays. I did not ride during the week or take a horse to school with me. Right. I basically was working a couple of jobs while I was in school. I was a waiter, and then I worked in a research laboratory. And so I had a job after class every day, and then on the weekends I worked in this research laboratory, which turned out to be great because it essentially paid for a lot of my education while I was doing it, which really helped. And I would only ride during the off season from school. I did that purposely so that I would not be distracted and that I could devote my entire time to my academics, and I wanted to excel in school. And so I divided my time. There was the fun time, and then there was the work time, and school was the work time.
Yeah. And when in your riding career did you decide that you wanted to go to the top of the sport? And I mean, you competed at the 5-star level, correct? Like you've done it all. Yes. So when did you decide that you wanted to compete at that top level? Okay, so I had always ridden horses, and much of what I did, because we did not have pony club where I grew up, we were a little bit too rural in my father owned a couple of farms. He's always trying to acquire more acreage. So as I got older, he got more land and we moved farther from the city, which I'm meaning the city of Chicago. I grew up in a rural area, but then it became more and more rural as I got in my late teens. And basically I rode, but a lot of it was mostly without instruction. So up until I had been maybe about a kind of mid to late teenager, I'd only had 3 riding lessons in my life. So I mostly did it on my own. And I was always a big reader, and I read all of the books that were available about, the great international jumpers and so forth. And then, of course, George Morris started producing books, which in Gordon Wright's book, Learn to Ride, Hunt, and Show. I acquired all these, and I read them multiple times. And I learned to ride a lot from watching people and reading and just copying who were people that were successful. And I worked as a groom when I was probably about 16, 17 is when I started. And I would go to the A horse shows. And I was glued to watching those riders in the warm up in the ring. And so I did a lot by watching and copying. And then I went to school. Then kind of fast forward, in 1991, Philip Dutton moved to the United States, and I started being his vet immediately as soon as he arrived in Chester County, Pennsylvania. And then traveling with him internationally to the big events. He had Troop Girdwood at the time, and Philip and I became fast friends. And then he had made the suggestion that he said, look, I know it's hard as a vet because you don't have time, but with eventing, he said, it's usually 1 or 2 days in the week, and I think you could do it. And I said, I don't know if I can ride. I don't think I have time. But he encouraged me to do so. And then when I did, I realized it was completely possible. So I started at the novice level. I did 3 novices. Then I did a couple of trainings, and then I went 2-star. So I only did about 5 lower level events. And then I went to a 2-star. I did my first one on a horse I borrowed who had not evented before. And we came 5th in our first long format 3-day event. And so that kind of gave me, I was then bitten by the eventing bug. We had phases A, B, C, and D. And that was, it was very exciting to do that steeplechase and so forth. And I really enjoyed it. And I also enjoyed meshing
the physiology of what you needed to know about the horse regarding, heart rate, ambient temperatures affecting cooling of the horse in the vet box prior to phase D. And I really enjoyed the whole, journey of learning how to make a horse fit and using my knowledge as a vet to assist me in whatever way I could. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, learning to ride. And so that was a horse a friend of mine had loaned me. And then I did that. And then I got a horse off the racetrack after that had some issues. I did a surgery on it, and it turned out to be successful. And I was able to take the horse on through, do quite a lot of events with them and quite successfully. And so that turned into a little bit of a kind of my MO was I'd find a horse usually off the racetrack and mm-hmm. educate it and get it going. And this went on for probably about 7 or 8 years. And then I would go to Kentucky with Philip every year as his veterinarian. And, of course, along the way, I started to acquire more and more eventing clients. And we came home from Kentucky one year, and I'll never forget it. So this is the answer to your question. It's very exciting to go to Kentucky, which we called Rolex at the time. We call it Land Rover now, but mm-hmm. we often just call it Kentucky. And Philip was sitting on a horse, and I went to give him a report on one of my exams. And I looked at him, I said, Phil, just once in my life, I would really like to ride around a 5-star. And that was in 2010. Uh-huh. That's when that was that moment in 2010. And I don't know how well you know Philip, but he's a man of few words. But
I met him a few times. Yeah.
And he was on the horse. He looked at me. He goes, okay, well, we need to go find your horse then. And it was that simple. He made a couple of phone calls, and next thing you knew, I was on a plane to England, where I met my now very good friend Carol G, who owns Fernhill Sport Horses. Mm-hmm. And she had found a horse that she said she thought an amateur would be able to ride, and that they'd be able to ride it in. At the time, we called it 3-star, but of course, we now call that 4-star. And that was actually my goal thing. Okay, let me get that far, and then we'll see how it goes. And maybe if I'm very fortunate, I could ride, at Kentucky. I said, I want to go around that Kentucky just once in my life. Yeah. And I went to England, and the horse that she had picked out for me turned out to not be the one I liked. There was another one there that I liked much more. And that turned out to be the horse I rode at Kentucky that we called him Butterfly because that was his real name. And his FEI name was Fernhill Flutter. Mm-hmm. But he had been named as a foal Butterfly Orchid, and so that was his real name. Okay. So everybody called him Butterfly. All of my friends eventing with me and so forth, and everyone in the barn. And so I purchased him from Carol, not knowing what level he would attain, and it just kept progressing year by year. So I bought him in about June 1st of 2010, mm-hmm. and then by the end of the year, I had gone intermediate with him, and he was going reasonably well. Always good on the cross country and the jumping part. The dressage is for many people, it was my challenge, especially being a guy. We don't have as much sensitivity and finesse as a lot of women riders who ride with so much feel. Men tend to use sometimes their strength too much, and so I just kept working at it. And then we went on and did that. And then by 2014, actually in 2012, I had him up to advanced all year, and I went to Bromont, and I was third in the 4-star in mm-hmm. Bromont, and that was a great thrill. So I had 2 4-star finishes in the top 3 that year with him. And then I ended up getting to Kentucky in 2014, where we were fortunate enough to finish in the top half of the field. And it was just an enormous thrill. And anyone who's asked me about it, I told them, if there's any way you can ever do it, it will be one of the most rewarding and unforgettable experiences of your life. It's just a week I relive all the time. It was just magical, really.
What was it like after having dreamt about it for so many years to go out and run on cross country at Kentucky, to actually be out there? What was that like?
Well, it's a moment I remember very vividly, in that you don't really, because you haven't done it, you don't know what feeling you're going to have. And I was very calm. I was walking to the start box because, like a lot of people, I get real butterflies in my stomach in the warm up. And then once I get to the start box, I go absolutely completely calm and very, very clear headed. And I take off from the start box and I jump fence 1 and I'm on my way to fence 2. And I thought, wow, these are Philip calls them Rolex proportions because those are some big tables and fences.
Yeah.
I'm on my way to fence 2, and I think I probably, muttered this out loud to myself. I said, "Oh my gosh, you are on course at Rolex." And it just, at that moment, I just said to myself, just ride your horse to the best of your ability and try to be as competitive as you can, and just do what is right for your horse. And that's what I did for the next 10 and a half minutes, and it was just such an incredible experience. He just went so fantastically, and most people that do their first 5-star, now that's not if you're Mark Dodd or Philip or Andrew Nicholson or these mega heroes in our sport, but many people don't finish their first 5-star. So to have completed and for him to have gone so well was just an enormous. I was just so proud of him, and it's just a great thrill to have achieved that. And we were able to complete we showed jump the next day. He went well, and so it was really, really exciting.
That's really incredible. I mean, both exhilarating and surreal. That's just incredible. And so I'm wondering too, with your education and experience as a vet, how does that incorporate into your life as a rider? Well,
basically, I always tell people I've been one of these incredibly lucky people throughout my life so many times. I do own my own practice, which is called Sports Medicine Associates, and my younger colleagues are now, as we're speaking, where they're going to take over the administration of the practice and so forth, which is giving me a bit of extra time. But because I owned the practice, it gave me a little bit of leeway for finding time to ride. And so trying to mesh your life as a working veterinarian, and most veterinarians, we do work a lot of extra hours a week. I mean, all horse people are working hard, but because I don't make my schedule, my patients make my schedule. So if you're on a horse and you get called away, you have to stop that moment and leave. So I eventually worked it out with my really generous coworkers, veterinarians in the practice, that I could have, kind of an hour and a half a day to devote to my riding. And so that's what I would do. And I would, I get up in the morning and I would do some calls. And then what I do is schedule my ride in as a case. So let's say if I did a case at 8 and then 9:30 and then, the next one is 11, I would schedule my ride, let's say at 11. I'm just making these numbers up, 11, and then be done by 12:30 and then go back to work till the end of the day. Yeah. And I still do something like that now. And then I go back to the barn at the end of the day. I hang my tack and everything up. I don't have time to clean it. Then I go back to the barn at the end of the day and I clean all my tack and my saddle pads and everything like that, and get everything ready for the following day at the end of the day. And that might be at 7 p.m. It might be at 9 p.m. And so it's a long day, but it's a day you look forward to every time you get up.
Yeah, that does sound like a long day. I mean, like you said, vets are known to have crazy, crazy schedules. So it's really amazing that you have worked out such a system that allows you to do both of the things that you love every day.
Well, many young veterinarians who have come to the practice, and some of them were externs, some were interns, and they'd ride on calls with me. And there's many vets they're very, advanced in the profession as sports medicine vets. They've been with our practice as young vets or students, and, they've all gone on to great success. They'd always say to me, we want to practice just like yours. And I always say to them, jokingly, of course, I say, well, it happened actually very naturally. I didn't even have to work at it. And they say, really? I said, no, that is, I was actually just joking. It took a lot of, forethought and training myself and training, my colleagues and so forth to allow me the time to do it. But what I would do was always wanting to put my share of work into the practice. People say, oh, you don't take a day off, because I do work on Saturdays and Sundays still. Now I do, which is not a problem. I actually have to say, after all these years, I still absolutely love my job, which I feel so, blessed that I can say that, because some people I think probably don't like their job, but I love my job. So what I would do is I would work on Saturdays more or less a full day, and then Sunday's kind of a half day, about 5 hours. And I would do that to make up for the time during the week that I took to ride my horse. So if I took an hour and a half on Monday to Friday, I would make up that time by doing cases on Saturday and Sunday. Mm-hmm. So I felt like I was putting my, shoulder to the grindstone for everyone in the whole practice. And so it was always equitable. And I think that that's the generosity of my coworkers, but then also the fact that I always tried to make sure I did my share. That is, I think, what made it successful.
And then as far as how your education goes into the care of like your own horses and how you think, I'm trying to get an understanding of how you think as a vet and a rider about your horses and the way that you do things.
I think that's a really good question, Julia. Basically, what you have to do when, let's say, if I look down at a horse of mine, I've had a horse that was an advanced horse. I developed a tendon injury at one point in his career. What I do when I look at a horse, if it belongs to a client, belongs to me, is at that moment, I'm not a rider. I'm a doctor. I'm a veterinarian. And I think absolutely with clarity and objectively and subjectively looking at the case to do my absolute best to diagnose the case and make a treatment plan for the horse. So whether it belongs to a client or if it belongs to me, even though I'm the doctor on the case,
right,
I can look at my own horse and I'll never forget, looking down at this, I said, wow, there's this. I'd taken a horse for a gallop very early in the morning. It was, it's just getting light, and this is the case I'm referring to. And it had been some rain that week, and I was on a fairly fast gallop in some of the beautiful hills of Chester County near the Dutton, Philip and Evie Dutton's farm, which is where I keep my horses. And he slipped a little bit in the gallop. Just was like a very mild misstep. But then a few hours later, he had a little bit of enlargement in his leg. And obviously that he'd gotten a small tendon injury. And it wasn't major, but when I took that ultrasound probe and ran it over his leg, you can't become emotional. Everything has to be clear, and you have to be a scientist and a doctor at the moment. And I said, okay, this horse has a tendon injury. He's going to be out for some months. And so when you're the veterinarian, you are wearing that hat. When you're the rider, you're wearing that hat. Now, as you probably know, I wear quite a lot of hats in this discipline. I've been an owner for Philip Dutton. I currently own for Olivia Dutton, Philip and Evie's daughter. And basically, I can put one hat on, put the other, set it down, and then put another one on, and I can change those hats pretty quickly. So I'm an owner, I compete, and I wear the veterinary hat. I'll never forget being at Kentucky. I was competing at Kentucky, and there was a horse that belonged to a friend and client of mine that sustained quite a serious injury on the cross country, and it needed a number of hours of diagnostic work following the cross country while we were at Kentucky that year. And I had my own horse. He had completed the event, and I had iced him, and he was wrapped. And I had, of course, a wonderful groom helping me, and so they could take the reins on that. And I put down my competitor hat for several hours. And I went and I got my diagnostic bag, and I was able to work there because I am an FBI veterinarian. And everyone in my practice is. I'm able to work at these events, and so you have to basically, with no emotion whatsoever, you have to be able to use your scientific brain to, decipher what's wrong with the horse, use your diagnostics. And so I've always been able to switch, between those roles quickly. And it's very clear to me.
And going back to your riding a little bit now, so you are keeping up with this amazing schedule that you've worked out for yourself, and you're riding, every day. I would assume every day.
Yes.
What horse are you riding at the moment?
Well, I have three of them that I'm riding. I'm actually in Wellington, Florida, while we're having this interview.
Very nice.
I'm part owner of with the Duttons and several other wonderful close friends that we've gone together to purchase a farm down here. It's a a great facility for us to have a larger piece of property down here in South Florida. We can do some fitness work and have all of our horses here, and we have access to the phenomenal show facilities here, which is great, both dressage and show jumping.
Yeah.
And so basically I have Sportsfield Candy, the horse that I've had now for 6 years, who is my incredible equine partner, who is really turned out to be the horse of a lifetime. And, I purchased him when he was sent to Philip to sell from David and Patricia Voss. And basically I ended up acquiring him, and I purchased him in 2016, September of 2016. And so I still have him, and I have said to many people, I generally sell my horses after I've progressed and gone up the levels with them, because I've pretty much done with them what I think they're able to do, and then I pass them on to sometimes a young rider, someone else, and I enjoy educating horses, so I allow them to go to a new home, and then I get another young horse, and I've done that continuously for years. But I said to this horse, Sportsfield Candy, we call him Candy, he is not on the sale list. I'm going to keep him, and when I have a nice little farm in Pennsylvania, and when he is ready to be retired, he's going to go to my farm, and he's going to stay there. So I will never get rid of Candy, and he's just been the kindest and most generous horse, and he's the horse that's able to win the CCIN last fall there in Tryon. Yep. And then I have a couple of young horses. I have one. I bought him in a show jumping barn from a friend of mine in New York, and he's only 6 years old. So he's just, I'm having him here in South Florida, show jumping him, and that's going very well. I've done one combined test with him. I did not do the cross country because I've actually never cross country schooled him. So I just did the dressage and show jumping, and he was in the lead. He got a 25 in the dressage. So that was very nice. And then I have a young thoroughbred. And some of these I own in partnership in a syndicate that I have with Olivia Dutton, Philip's daughter. And so Olivia and I share some of these horses, so we both might ride them and compete them, and we kind of help each other and so forth. So we have several additional horses in the syndicate that are strictly for Olivia, and then we have three aforementioned that are for me. And so I ride and educate them, and then if I'm maybe have a week where I'm unable to do that for work reasons, whatever, Olivia might ride and compete them. And so that horse is by Union Rags, the Belmont Stakes winner. That was trained by Michael Matz and owned by Phyllis Wyeth, and who also was a remarkable woman who unfortunately has passed now. But she had that horse in training with Michael. He ended up winning the Belmont Stakes, and he sired a number of horses. And Philip has a promising young horse. It's only just done a couple of 2-stars now successfully, and has won a lot of events. His name is Lincoln's Address. He's also by Union Rags. So this horse has 50% of the same sire, so 50% of the same blood. Is a bay horse. And his name is Undaunted Rags. And he has a very good mind. I've actually won a sanctioned event with him already as a 4-year-old, and he is here in Florida being educated, and so we have hopes that he will make a nice horse at some level in the sport, for me or Olivia or somebody.
What an incredible relationship you have with the Duttons. It's so fantastic.
I always say, I just I have a very, very strong feeling that you can make a lot of things work out for yourself if you are strong-willed enough and desire for it to happen. And I think that this is a lot of what I've been able to, achieve, is because I wanted it so badly that I essentially made it work out. Now, there is a negative to a little bit of what I'm doing, and people say to me all the time, how can you be a vet and be this busy and still ride a couple of horses a day and compete? And I do tell them, I'm somewhat, I'm joking a little bit, but it's truthful. I say it really is at the expense of other normalcies in my life. And that is really true. I was a very avid long distance runner for about 30 years. I really loved long distance running and competed in many competitions and so forth, even after I moved to Pennsylvania in 1982 from the Midwest. And I was really into that. Then once I got into the riding, encouraged by Philip and so forth, I I had to give something up because there's only so much time in a day. I continued to work the same hours as a vet. So what happened was I basically replaced my long distance running with riding.
Mm-hmm.
And of course I would only ride one horse a day. And then it became apparent to me that people that were riding a lot more horses each day were getting better. And obviously if you ride 4 a day, you have 4 times the experience of someone riding 1 a day.
Yeah.
So that's when I realized that the acquisition of more horses and doing as many as I could in a day would help educate my body and my mind to understand riding better, and things like throughness, connection, and all the challenges that we have as amateur riders.
Mm-hmm.
I tell people a lot that one of the differences between amateur riders and the professionals, the professionals obviously have most of them have this extraordinary talent, but one of the things as an amateur that is challenging is you just don't get to ride that much. This is one of the problems. Most of us have another job. You don't get to have that many hours in the saddle.
Yeah.
And so your education is slower. So my thought was, well, ride as much as you can. So what I did was I started cutting hours off of other parts of my life, things like sleep, things like this. And I actually am pretty well known for that. I do not sleep much, and I'm able to essentially go on very little sleep for a very long period of time. So that's what I started doing. I'd get up earlier in the morning, get a horse ridden, stay out late at night and get another horse ridden, and do that. So you have to sacrifice something that you might want to do to have the time with your horses. But in the end, it was what I wanted the most, and so it was rewarding as anything to give up my long distance running and spend the time with the horses. And now I'm really hooked,
Yeah.
So I'm very entrenched in this whole, learning and show jumping and, getting my dressage as good as I can. And I'm down here in Florida. I'm really enjoying this show jumping. It's really great to get in the ring a few times a week, because I have several horses here that I can take to the horse shows. And so that has really helped me, get some mileage in the ring.
Wow, the dedication is incredible.
Well, you don't really know anybody who's successful in their chosen profession without being dedicated.
Yeah.
So I think that goes with it. I think that if you want to succeed, you have to do it that way. I have a lot of friends that are amateur riders, and no criticism intended, but I can tell they're going to be limited in the level they're going to achieve because there are no shortcuts. In this sport, and I am lucky that I've been around some of the best riders in the world for so much of my professional life. Having been involved in international show jumping as a veterinarian for many years before I met Philip, and these top riders, this is what they do. They just they live and breathe their horses, and notwithstanding they're just enormous talent, but they give everything to it. And so as I said earlier, I just copied what other people were doing that were successful.
Yeah.
And so that's how I went on.
And so what does your training look like? Do you have like a lesson once a week or more than once a week? What does that look like for you?
Yes. So, good question. I have a very definite feeling about how to improve and so forth. Many people, like every time someone, has a clinic, they want to be there having the clinic. For me, that didn't work that well because it often involved being in another town, another state, a lot of travel and so forth. Mm-hmm. So my thought was immerse yourself in a program that you see to be successful and put your faith in that person that is your trainer and stick with them. And that is what I did with Philip. Mm-hmm. And it is obviously, my theory has been proven to work. Philip is, fortunately for all of us, he's extremely generous with his time and his knowledge. And so I have multiple lessons a week. Now, they might be different types of lessons. And what it is, this syndicate that I have with Philip and his daughter, basically he directs their training. And so what we have is we have a logbook that every day when you arrive at the barn, you can do it the night before because he does the book the night before. You look in the logbook and what you're going to do the next day. So yesterday, when I got to the barn, he had down that I was going to do jumping exercises with 2 horses. So I was taught on 2 horses, and it was all about how to prepare them for jumping. It's not just, go warm up and I'll see you out there and we jump some jumps. It isn't like that with Philip. It's all about the preparation of how to make sure that your horse is properly in front of your leg, connected, that the horses can go forward, that you can add to a fence, that you can basically gallop a fence like a cross-country style.
Yeah.
And you have to be prepared for all of that when your lesson begins. And so that's what my lessons were about yesterday. Now, Philip had to leave town for a couple days to go give a clinic, and so he'll return where I am in Florida now. He'll come back to Florida, and I'll probably have another lesson with him on Thursday on a couple of horses. So I have multiple lessons a week, and the lessons don't need to be a predetermined period of time, like it's going to be an hour lesson, or you're going to have a short session, half an hour.
Right.
What you do with Philip, he has a plan in his head, and Philip is very, very smart about how to train you based on what your level of education is at the time and what your horse's level of education is at the time. He's really good at knowing how to put the 2 of them together. So I have this young thoroughbred, we might do very different exercises than we do with Sportsfield Candy that has been going advanced for 5 years, So it's based on that horse's current level of knowledge and education. And everything with Philip is about seeing if you could do it more with your balance and your seat and your leg than your hand. He wants you to always have a quiet hand. And so this is a lot of what the lessons are about. I've heard him say, dozens of times over the years, he said, always see if you can use a little bit less hand. He says that to everybody, so that you're basically have a sympathetic hand with the horse and see if you can direct the horse with your leg, really, which is what dressage is about. We are a hand-oriented society, and so people want to use their hand. But you watch these top dressage riders, and you watch these horses and these CDIs. The riders have these beautiful, quiet hands that aren't doing anything, or apparently not to the eye, and they're controlling the horse with aids from their seats and their legs, which gives it great visual beauty and also an incredible way to communicate with the horse, as that's what the lessons are like.
And do you ride with Olivia at all?
Oh yes, so
that's so fun. So
we are a very tight group. The group that's with Philip, which would be Philip and Evie Dutton own the business, and then their daughter Olivia is she is very talented, and then she also it's very clear that she wants to go on as a horse professional, and so we are all at the same farm together. And there's a number of, I don't want to use the term working students. I can say they're just, they work for Philip Dutton Eventing, and they are part of the team. We all get along fantastic. It's a whole team. Everybody helps everybody else. Nobody leaves without checking with everybody at the end of the day, which might be 5:30, it might be 6:15 at night. We don't work we don't work into the dark. Philip is very organized and wants everyone to be done at a reasonable hour. So everybody checks with everybody else to see, is there anything that needs to be done? Did this horse have, hoof dressing applied to their feet? Every horse gets groomed every day by a rider or groom. They're put on cross-sizing, groomed after their work and bath that day. And so it's communication amongst the group. And so, that's how we all are together. So, for example, today I rode 3 horses today. And while I was riding, Olivia would be on some of her horses. She might have been in the same arena as me. She might have been, we have a large grass, like a jumping area, like a big Grand Prix field. And, we're not jumping Grand Prix size jumps, but it's like a Grand Prix field that you would see in a jumper situation. And, we'd be out there together, and, you might chat for a minute while you have your horse hacking, and then, when you're working, you're concentrating and you're not chatting with anybody. And so, yes, I ride at the farm every day with Olivia, and Philip's he has hired riders, a young man who is very talented that's here riding for Philip right now, and a couple of young girls that are, coming up through the levels with him, that have, actually won CCI. And so it's a really nice group of people that works collectively to get all the work done properly every day.
And I want to go back to your competing a little bit now. What is on the radar for you? I know you said you're down in Wellington right now and you're doing some show jumping stuff, but what's next for eventing?
Yeah, so I was asked this recently, and everything I have asked this Sportsfield Candy to do, he has ticked the box off. I think I've done about 18 4-stars with him. If I'd add them up over several years, I kind of two in the spring, 3 in the fall, and I've had him for. I probably was going advanced about a year after I had him, so that kind of gets up in that close to 20 range. So I think I've done about 18 with him, and a number of top 10 finishes and second in the 3-star, and then the win and trying at the 2-star championship there last fall. So he's done everything I've asked him to. So currently, he's 16 years old, by the way. I don't want to wait until I can feel his body is struggling to do it. I want to give him his exit from the discipline at a time when he still has his body's in great shape still. Right. So I'm just going to show jump him throughout this winter and spring, and then see what I'm going to do. He's my top tier horse right now. And then I have a number of young horses coming up, a couple that Olivia's riding, a couple that I'm riding, this thoroughbred I mentioned on Dauntic Rags, and the one that has I bought him from a show jumping barn, but he'd make a wonderful event horse. He's beautiful, he moves beautifully, and he is a phenomenal jumper. And so I'll probably start them at the lower tiers and work them up and educate them the way I have the others. And usually what happens, you can have plans for a horse, but in the end, the horse more or less lets you know what they're going to do and what they're comfortable doing. And so I do a lot of what I do with my horses, not as much by a graph in a book, but by feel. And so I'm going to get going with them. And after you do a number of events at one level, you kind of get the sense, okay, they're ready to go to the next level. And so I tremendously enjoy finding and then educating young horses. One of the biggest enjoyments I get. And because I've kind of ticked off the boxes I have wanted to over, the last, 15 years or so, I feel I have this great kind of clean slate in front of me that I can more or less do what I want with them.
That's great.
And so I'm going to do a lot of show jumping with Candy. And they have a wonderful division down here in Wellington. It's called the Masters. It's basically for us old folks, to be honest with you, which is kind of fun. And they're very generous with the showgrounds. They have the international ring, which is where they have the 4- and 5-star Grand Prix on a Saturday night. And they let the Masters class go in the international ring. They let the Masters go in there on Saturday mornings and Sunday mornings every weekend, pretty much. And it's just a real thrill to get in that huge ring.
Oh, yeah.
Now, we do it earlier in the morning, so they don't have the tens of thousands of people in the stand that they do for the Grand Prix. And, we're not anywhere near as fun to watch as McLean Ward going around on a 5-star horse, but basically.
But even getting into that ring,
it's just a really great thrill to get in that ring and feel that kind of excitement of the international arena. So I've been doing that this winter, and I enjoy it. And there are a lot of divisions they have for amateur riders in show jumping. In eventing, as you know, there are no amateur divisions. Yes. I tell people all the time that they don't have amateur divisions. Everybody rides together. If you're a Rolex winner, like Philip, if you're a Fair Hill winner, like Boyd, we're in the same division as them. There's no divisions for people that are amateurs. And so I actually really like that, because if you prevail and win, you have really accomplished something. And so I like that they don't, have it more or less simplified down just because you're an amateur. The sport is still the same. It is an international discipline. And then in show jumping, because there's such a larger number of people, they do have these amateur divisions, which I've been riding and really do enjoy. And some of these amateur riders, I'll see them in the warm-up and I say, oh, I think you're an imposter. I keep teasing them. I say, because you're awfully good. You should be a professional. So they have some extremely good amateur riders in show jumping. And so these are divisions I'm currently competing in. I'm enjoying it. So I'm going to do that for a bit and then probably jump back and forth, educating these young horses, doing some events and trying to always look for that next top prospect that I think I could acquire and get educated a bit, and then maybe share it with Olivia if that's a horse that suits her.
That's awesome. And you touched on this a little bit before about nerves, and I think you said you get a little bit of butterflies when you're in the warm-up.
Oh, boy. Oh, yes, I do.
So how do you handle your nerves?
So they're visible on most people. And I remember talking, Steve Bradley won the Burley horse trials on a horse called Sassy Reason, quite some years ago, when kind of he was in the middle of his career, I'll say. And I then saw him, I didn't know Steve very well at the time, but he then was at, just a little local horse trial in the novice division after he had won Burley. And I remember seeing him and I said, Steve, this must be a very peculiar feeling to you that you're here riding a horse in the novice after you've just won Burley in the last couple of weeks. And he said, oh no. It all depends what you're sitting on. And every time you leave that start box, it's a new experience. And he says, if you are not nervous, there's something wrong with you. And I'll never forget that. So here is a guy, he had won Burley, and he is telling me that if you don't feel nervous when you go to the start box, there's something wrong with you. And I think the great thing about nerves, so I don't try to suppress them past what I think is the normal feeling. It's a discipline where quick thinking, good balance, and making decisions very quickly about your horse and you are vital to you having a successful trip around the cross country. So what I try to do is, hopefully not appear to have, a sweaty, forehead and palms and so forth. But basically, I try to concentrate the whole time that I'm I don't have a problem concentrating at all. I concentrate the whole time I'm in the warm-up. And the minute I walk down to that start box and go into that start box, it absolutely leaves me, and I am just could not be more crystal clear about what I want to do with my horse from the moment that first gallop step out of the box. And most of my friends, having talked to Boyd about this, he said it is actually the same for him. And even Philip, who is kind of like the king of cool, he always has that poker face on. Yeah. He said even he feels nervous. You have to feel nervous when you go into that start box because you're about to start a very daunting ride that might be 6 minutes, but as you do the CCIs, it might be 10 and a half minutes, and it's just an enormous thrill, the sport. And people who haven't tried it but have the opportunity, I certainly I think that you'll that rewarding feeling when you cross that finish line successfully is just tremendous. It is a highs and lows sport. I tell people all the time, as many sports are. You recall a number of these Olympic Games going back for 20, 30 years. They used the wide world of sports. They used to have the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat, and that was their motto. As they would show somebody maybe going down the slalom doing one thing, and then somebody on the hill having a fall and sliding down the mountain. Yeah. And basically, that is what eventing is like. It's the thrill of victory when you're successful, and the agony of defeat, your horse having a stop, or maybe tripping in the water, stumbling when they jump in, or something like this. These are moments you never forget. They're agonizing, and when you have gone to an event that's far from home, that drive home is very long when you have not had a successful cross country. And so I have no trouble concentrating, and so the nervous part leaves me immediately as soon as I leave that start box, and so that's been absolutely fine. I don't know if that's natural for everybody. Boyd said it's the same for him, so I think it probably goes with the territory.
And just one more question to wrap up here. You've been doing this not only as a rider but as a vet for so many years. What is it that has kept you involved for so long? What anchors you to everything?
As far as in the sport of eventing?
Horses in general, really.
Yeah, okay. So, all right, that's good. So, just the desire to ride and be successful as a rider and to try to achieve the best success and level I can with my horses. And then they're married to my job. They're married to each other. I'm with horses all day, every day. And I can't imagine not being around horses. I just am so entrenched in the desire to do something with them all the time. And I think the real answer to your question, Julia, is I tell people this all the time about dressage, and it's the same in veterinary medicine. It's the same as probably riding in any discipline, I would think. I've not ridden at that kind of level in show jumping and dressage. These, people that are riding in, I-1 and 2 and, pre-St. George, that's not the level where I ride in dressage. It's different in eventing or, in the show jumping doing, the meter 40s and up. But basically, I think it's because I'm always trying to achieve perfection, and I don't think I've ever really gotten there. So it makes I have that burning desire to keep going, to try to always be better and more perfect. So there's always another tier to try to reach. Yeah. And I think that that's really the answer that I have for you, is that what keeps me going? I always want to do my ultimate best in every case I have as a veterinarian and give 100%. And my clients know that I will never give up on a case, and they will have my full and undivided attention to try to be successful in diagnosing and managing their horse to the best of my ability and my colleagues. Same in riding. I every day want to get better and achieve a more highly schooled level of my position on the horse, my leg and seat position, my hand, my back, and of course, I'm moderately old to be doing this sport at a high level. It's unusual, actually, and so I'm trying to always be aware of my posture on the horse, to not letting my age get in the way of me, having a straighter back. And Philip is very big on taking videos of us while we're in the ring and showing us what we look like, and that's been a really big help. They say, wow, I need to sit up a little bit better, or my shoulders are a bit rounded, or something like this. So I'm always trying to achieve a higher level of perfection, and so that's where I go every time I get on my horse. I had this phenomenal lesson with Philip yesterday where, and I'm going back to everything has to come from your leg and your seat. I had to ride my horse at different forward levels in the walk, in the trot, and the canter without using my reins. I could hold the reins on the buckle, but I was not allowed to touch the horse's mouth. I would have to go forward and back. And you have to go forward from your leg. This isn't too hard, but then to slow the horse without using your hands. And I had to do this first he had me in walk, then in trot, and to the left and to the right, then in canter. And it's really fantastic. So he's away today, so I practiced all of that, and I did it on more than one horse. I said, okay, I can do this on more than one horse. So the horse learns to get your aids, and that you're going to communicate with him largely through your seat and your legs, with less hand. And so this is something I could say I need to do this every day for a couple of years. So that's what keeps me glued to the sport and my profession, is always trying to be better than I was the year before, the day before, and the moment before.
Well, this has just been the most interesting and lovely conversation, Kevin. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.
Well, absolutely. It's my pleasure, and I'm always happy to be interviewed, and I feel fortunate that I am asked for it. I think what has happened is, and I don't mean this in any kind of way where anyone's getting a pat on the back here, really, except my incredible horses and my training program that I'm in with the Dutton group. But I think that I've probably been a little bit of a role model for other amateurs to say, I'm sure they look and say, this guy's getting up there. I'm pretty close to 70 years old, and I'm turning 69. And so basically they realize that it is attainable. And this is one of the messages, or the gift I've been able to give the amateur community in our discipline. I'm just couldn't be happier, because, and I've told so many people, if you want it badly enough, it is absolutely possible. You absolutely can ride at Kentucky. You're going to have to give some things up. Yeah. And it is possible. And even if you think you have enough money, you can still make it happen. You have to know how to make the lifestyle of riding at a high level work for your lifestyle with your day job. And I think that a lot of people have looked at this and realized that this is possible for them too. And so I'm hoping that is the case. And I'm positive. I've told so many people, just given them a pat on the back and said, I am positive that if you want this, that you can make it happen for you. And if you get a chance to ride at a 5-star, if you get a chance to ride at Kentucky, it will be a week that you will relive over and over and over again, just with incredible, feeling of it. I think the feeling of accomplishment is the most incredible thing that I took away from that, so that incredible horse I had.
Speaking for myself, I'm an amateur, and just hearing you talk about your dedication and everything that you've done to make, your profession and your love of the sport work for you, it is very inspiring to hear. So I'm sure that it will reach our listeners as well.
Well, that's great, and I actually could go on, and I can remember I was as a young veterinarian, I had the pleasure of being able to work for many top show jumping stables, and I've taken a number of clinics from top riders, Joe Fargis and George Morris and so forth. And I'll never forget George saying in a clinic, he says, don't do what's easy when you're riding your horse. Do what's hard for you.
Yeah.
And little things like that have resonated with me, and I've kept them in my head. And this is what I do. If it's a little bit harder for me to do something, I do it more when I ride.
Yeah.
It's easy to do what's easy for you.
Uh-huh.
And if you keep doing that, you don't really progress. So I've kept that as a little bit of my work model. And so, that's just one thing I can think of right now. And this is what you have to do. If you're going to make it too easy for yourself, you might end up with some limitations. But if you do what's hard to do and discipline yourself and make yourself do it, you can be successful.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode with Kevin Keane, and a big thank you to the sponsor of this week's episode, Practical Horseman On Demand. Learn more at practicalhorsemanondemand.com. You can subscribe to the Practical Horseman podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen. While you're there, please rate and review the show. Also, tune into our minisode series, The FOD Pod, where you'll hear audio lessons from our favorite Practical Horseman on-demand clips. When you tune into the FOD Pod, listen closely for a promo code for 15% off your Practical Horseman on-demand subscription. Thanks again for listening to this week's episode. I'm Julia Murphy, and you've been listening to the Practical Horseman podcast.